recognizing that we have a role to play and we're all servants in a school, and we're serving a much greater goal. So taking on that mantle of responsibilities ahead is something that you can grow into. And if you have people around you encouraging you in that respect, then that makes it a bit easier.
Hello and welcome to the Education Vanguard Podcast. My guest today, along with co-host Howard Stribbell, is Dr. Helen Wright, a globally renowned education leader, executive coach, board advisor, distinguished career over 3 decades. She's led major schools in the UK and Australia. She's served as the president of the Girls' School Association, and she's transitioned now from the head's office to becoming a voice in governance. She dedicates her time to recruiting and coaching the next generation of educational changemakers, helping boards navigate complex strategic landscapes and championing diverse leadership across the whole education sector. I actually came to meet Helen through chance, as she's on the founding board of the new Dalton school in Hong Kong, which is a wonderful school that will be featuring on a school tour at the upcoming 21C conference. We're thrilled to have her with us, Howard and I, to dissect what it truly takes to lead with integrity and vision in today's changing world. And you'll also get a chance to connect with Helen at the 21st Century Learning Conference in March as well. And perhaps we'll get into a little bit of that. So welcome, Helen.
Oh, thank you ever so much, Justin. And so nice to be here with you and Howard. I'm looking forward to our conversation. I always like sharing and discussing.
Fantastic, yeah. So I wanted to just kick off with one question around transitioning from teacher to leader. So, I think a lot of the audience in this podcast and the 21C community are people who may be educators who are interested in transition into leadership. And so I wonder for you made that decision, you made that transition. Was there a moment or a mentorship or where you shifted your mindset from being an educator in a school to being a leader?
That's a really good question. And do you know what? I've reflected on that quite a lot over the years, because people often ask me that, was there sort of a single moment and you went, oh, yes, I know this is what I want to be. And in truth, that wasn't the case for me. And I'd like to look back and go, oh, yes, that was the case. But actually, I think that when I look back and look at the journey, it's been powered by the same purpose. That really strong purpose that speaks to values, that purpose about making a difference in the world. And also when you see things which you think aren't right, trying to do something about it. And that's been the powering direction of my journey. Now, that's not to say that other people en route weren't really helpful. I think mentors have been amazing en route. But it doesn't mean I decided at some point, well, I'm definitely going to be ahead. That's what it is. Because I'm not sure that's the reality for most people. If anything, one of the things that I find myself doing is when I recognize that people have a strong purpose, is particularly encouraging them to say, well, look, how can you make more of that? How can you have more impact? And helping people believe in themselves in order to do that. I'm always slightly suspicious of people who say, well, I've wanted to be a head teacher since I was 5.5. And I think, oh, really? Really? It's like, where's that come from? What's the purpose? What's the motivation? So my job, as I see it now, is always to dig down and help people understand that purpose and the values and see where that's going to lead them. And it's slightly different for different people.
Yeah, that's really good. I think a lot of us fall into leadership. We're doing something and we do it well and we're pursuing it, and then opportunities kind of come along and maybe we get shoved into it, maybe we fall into it. That purpose is great. That's kind of that northern light, that guiding star. How would you say, though, the transition is when you do become the head, you're carrying that much responsibility? I often talk about headship as being the loneliest seat in the building, because you know too much, you can't share, and you have a lot of responsibility. Did you experience that same thing? And what's your advice for leaders?
So, funny enough, I did experience that, which is one of the reasons why, again, I work with leaders to help prepare them so as not to have that much of a gap. And that's because I took over as acting head in a school when I was 30, and I'd only been in that school for a term as deputy. So it was like one of the steepest learning curves of my life, absolutely. But I think there's a lot you can do to prepare for that. And some of that's very, very practical. It's about the skills that you're going to need to develop in order to be able to manage people, manage larger groups of people, be aware of the structures of school, etc., etc. But what you're describing there, that sense of loneliness, it's knowing right from the beginning that the people who you're around, everybody
Mm.
matters. Everybody matters in your life. The people, the other mentors you've had, the other heads, everybody matters. And the more that you can talk to people and share with people beyond the school in confidential areas, the easier it is. And I think sometimes it's the accepting of the mantle of responsibility that can be quite challenging, because we think, are we worthy of
Mm.
it? Gosh, such a lot is expected of us. What can we do there? And I think recognizing that we have a role to play, and we're all servants in a school, and we're serving a much greater goal. So taking on that mantle of responsibilities ahead is something that you can grow into. And if you have people around you encouraging you in that respect, then that makes it a bit easier. So I think there are skills. I think there's a
Mm.
mindset as well too. But I think the more you go on, the most successful leaders I come across are those who are actually quite humble, recognize they're going to make loads of mistakes, but have people around them to help them and support them in that. And if you can go into it, that servant leadership, that's great. But also not relying on others. There are times when you absolutely have to rise to the role, and that's your job to do that. That's what you are put in post for. It's great fun too. I mean, I will say, even though I think it marks you totally being ahead in a positive way. It's I don't know if you experience it when you go to conferences and you see people and they've been ahead. It's like, oh yes, I know that. I know that it's like you've developed certain muscles and certain ways of thinking about the world and seeing the world that's there. And I wouldn't miss that for anything.
Yeah, I had the opportunity where one of our secondary principals was going to come and take over my headship. I was the acting head at the time. We hired
Mm.
internally. So it meant we had a full year of preparing, and we met every week, and it was literally called
Gosh.
Becoming the Head.
Mm.
Because you're right, you need to work different muscles than what you worked as a principal. And they do start to take shape, and they strengthen and hone, and then they
Yeah.
do look different. Yeah, I liked how you described that. I think sometimes as heads, we don't want to admit that we don't know. Like, as you mentioned, sometimes we don't feel worthy of the mantle. We're worried about the responsibility. So we're reluctant to say, I feel lonely or I need help, because then that's
Mm.
reaffirming the lack of confidence that we have. But I think somehow we have to own it, and then build those
Mhm.
connections and realize that we can't do it alone. It does really take a team.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really fantastic. I like both of your reflections on that, and I just wanted to follow up one quick point on the question of like feeling like you're confident to do the job, the imposter syndrome thing. Do you think that's something that ever ends? Maybe this is a question for both of you, maybe, or is that something that you always have? Does that make you good? Is it scary to have a leader that feels like, well, I know everything. I'm good now.
I think it's scary to have a human being who thinks they know everything and they don't need to change, actually, to be honest, because I would argue that there are some distinct blind spots if that's the case. And it's, as with all of these things, it's people talk about imposter syndrome, and I think it's quite good to be able to name it, that sense of I don't feel as though I'm good enough to do that. And I do think it serves people well up to a point. Everything usually serves us well up to the point when it doesn't serve us well. And it doesn't serve people well if they're crippled with anxiety, they're unable to make decisions, they feel as though they're staying awake at night worrying about things and thinking, why am I here? That is not serving people well, and that needs some work, and it needs some help for those particular people to enable them to get to a point where they recognize what they can do well, what they still need to know how to do better, and how they're going to change that. And that's what I think a lot of coaching is. Certainly, in terms of that one-to-one coaching, being able to challenge people and support them in equal measure to get them to that point. That's a good direction to go in. I think, though, that having an element of us not feeling as though we can do everything powers us to learn and to grow. And I think it's particularly important that heads remember that, because remember that heads of school, lots of senior leaders as well, people lead almost like a schizophrenic life. It's like to the outside world, you're often saying, everything's marvelous, it's all wonderful, everything's great, we're brilliant. Yeah, I'm brilliant as a head. Don't say it quite like that far, but you're saying that and you're thinking that, and you've got to believe that. But internally, you go, oh, this isn't good enough. We've got a problem in year 9, and we have to deal with this. And oh dear, difficult parent there. Oh, difficult member of staff, got to deal with this. This is no good. So there's this kind of distinct difference, the external and the internal. And I think one of the things I say to people as heads is, don't believe your own hype. Don't believe that, because there will always be things that need to grow and change, and we need to develop and grow within that. Of course, we've come to a point as sometimes where the words that should help us don't help us. We often talk about schools as being, that's an improving school, or a school in need of improvement, as if that's a bad thing. But we've actually said that's a bad thing. It's an improving school. Oh, it's not good enough. It's not good enough. Actually, do you know what? If we were to own that word properly, an improving school is a learning school. It's a growing school. It's vibrating with wonderful new knowledge and skills going on. And wouldn't that be fantastic if we could change the meaning and own that word differently? We are a learning environment in schools, and somehow we've painted over the years schools to be, they've got to be perfect or they're no good. And actually, I would say that school leaders and school boards, etc., have played a part in that, not to mention governments and education boards and so on as well. And there are a lot of different elements to that. But I think we need to recapture that sense of learning is great. Growing is great. And that, I think, helps with that sense of imposter syndrome. It's like the growth mindset. Okay, so I don't know this yet, but I will.
Yeah, I think there's that difference between, we like to think that there's a difference between improving and innovation. It's improving, and then it's static, and then we innovate once we finally arrive. But no, innovation and improving is just growth. So yeah, reframing, that's a good point, Helen. I'm going to ask something controversial since we're talking about leadership. I know that you do a lot of work with women leaders. Are men and women leaders different?
Well, every individual leader should be different. They absolutely should. If you're going to be an authentic leader, then you are going to be drawing on a unique set of experiences, values. I mean, genes, all sorts of things going on. And I think one of the real drives is to help people understand who they are as a leader. I really, really do. So I think it's too blunt to say women leaders are different from male leaders. I mean, we over the years, we've tended to attribute certain characteristics to women and certain characteristics to men. And there are some elements. I think there are some differences that you can see which derive from biology almost. But I wouldn't feel qualified to talk about that. But the drives that there are. But I think that when it gets to leadership, what we're really looking for is somebody, a successful leader in that context. Are they able to bring enough of themselves to be what the context needs of them? And are they able to adapt sufficiently well in order to be what the organisation will need from them going forward? And I don't think that depends on whether people are male or female at all. I really don't. I do think that female leaders still often have to overcome certain biases in the minds of other stakeholders, and I think, and that's because in our society, east, west, wherever, there still is that picture that we have of the male leader. And that is still something which it'll take time for that to diminish. And we're in a process of transition as far as that's concerned. So there are still barriers to leadership for women, which is one of the reasons why I enjoy working with women. I mean, I enjoy working with men as well, but there are those people. So they sometimes need to work that little bit harder through no fault of their own, but just because the world is still moving.
I wonder if we could dive a bit more into that piece, right? Because, I mean, aside from whether men and women leaders are different, one thing we can say for sure is that there are fewer leaders who are women in international schools. I mean, writ large as well, but specifically in schools. And so I wonder, I mean, besides the kind of perception gap thing that you're talking about there, what else do you attribute that to, and how do we move this forward?
I think it does come down to perception, actually. And I think there are structures that, if you've got an imbalance somewhere, there are structures you can put in place in order to help balance that out. And that does mean encouraging women from an earlier stage to be able to say, yes, do you know what, I've got skills I can develop as a leader. If you can allow people to see women leaders more and be out and about, I think that does make a difference. It's easier to be something that you can see. So I think that all schools actually have a responsibility to make sure that they are actively developing their women leaders, because there's a global imbalance in that sense. And people say, well, that doesn't affect my school, why should I worry about that? We've got plenty of leaders, etc., etc. Actually, that's not the case. We have a wider responsibility in schools, and what goes around comes around. If you will be able to, as a school, to recruit people from outside, from other schools who've been doing similar things. So I think that investing in women leaders, mentoring, helping them see that they can go and do other things, and encouraging them, making people believe in themselves. I think all of that's really important. I think there are other structural elements as well, though. I think we have to do as much as we can to support leaders and women leaders who take time out to have children, and ensure that they're able, should they wish to continue being a leader at a later stage, and for that not to feel like a setback in their career, because quite frankly, if they don't have children, there'll be no schools. So I mean, simple as that, really. So we need to invest in them. And I also think that during the recruitment process, it's important not just to rely on the people around the table of the board. If you think, or there is even a suspicion, that there may be some bias there. Now, we all have bias. And the only way to spot that bias is really for external eyes, which is why I work with LSE Education for Recruitment. I enjoy doing that very much, because it's about bringing external eyes to the board and helping boards see that there are other options, because that unconscious bias can sometimes go quite deep. None of us think we have bias. None of us think, we all think, or if we do go, oh, yes, I know I'm biased, but we don't really believe it. But we all do. And if we can embrace that and recognize that we do, and other people are able to call us out on that, or at least challenge us if we're thinking, oh, no, that person wouldn't fit. And if you're ending up with an all-male shortlist for roles, there's probably something in there that you should challenge. I mean, maybe not, but at least you should challenge it. And I think having those external eyes, unafraid to challenge, that's important.
I totally agree with that. I think the intentionality needs to be there with this, because I don't know what, I'm sure you've heard the stat, I don't forget what the exact numbers is, but they've done, polling where they ask people, they say, would you apply for this job? And women will say, well, I'll apply for it if I feel like I have 95% of the things on the list, and men will say, well, I'll give it a go even if I feel like I've only got 20%. The numbers are not exactly right, but I think that there's something to that, right? Unless you intentionally tapping people on the shoulder, encouraging, setting that up, I think you are going to end up essentially with that pipeline thing, and it's not good enough to say, well, 88 out of 10 applicants were men, so sorry, that's just the way it is.
Absolutely. That comes back to the point that I think we've all got a responsibility to encourage that, to develop. And this is the thing about schools. Schools have a responsibility to themselves, to the child in front of them, to the families, to the institution, to the growth of the school. Absolutely have all of that. We have a wider responsibility to society too. And it's acknowledging that and recognizing that that actually will feed into the success of our own school too is an important step forward.
Yeah, I think that's a much broader picture and a little bit more difficult to hang on to because we're trying to fix the problems at our own school, the unique context. But yeah, certainly your admonishment that we have a responsibility. The little girl in grade 5, should be able to look up and see someone who looks like her in leadership,
Yes.
even if we say we don't have a diversity
Correct.
issue within our school. But yeah, modeling it not just for our school and our community, but for the greater global world. Yeah, very good points.
Mhm.
You mentioned that you work very closely with recruiting high-level leaders. And where do you think most governing bodies get it wrong when they're writing the job description for the new head or the new principal or the new CEO?
So I think they get it wrong when they don't use recruiters. I think I'm bound to say that. But again, it's that external eye, and I would say too that if writing a job description can seem terribly onerous. Oh, we've got to get the job description right. What tasks do we want this person to do? And there'll be an element of that. But essentially, if you've got a strategic plan, then you know the direction which you want the school to go. So you want them to deliver on that. If you don't have a strategic plan, one of the things you want them to do is to write the strategic plan. And you want them to do all the usual stuff that you'd expect of a leader of school. And you can go simply to AI and get them to print out a job description for you. That's not actually the most important thing. The really important thing is working out how you want them to do it. How you want somebody to lead. What is it that the school needs from the person and really needs, not just replicate who was before or be the opposite of who was before, which is the two broad groups that governors tend to think that, or board members tend to think that the head should fall into. But what do we really need? What does our community need? How do we want to shift our community? And if so, what kind of leader are we going to need in that respect? And I don't think nearly enough time is put into thinking how that people want things. And that's what I would say, focus in on that.
Great point, because it's not just a checklist when we're talking about senior leaders. It's not about doing things right. It's about doing the right things. And as you say, doing them in the right way, because each school is going to be a little bit unique that way. And it shouldn't just be reactionary to whatever the previous head was like. But how do you get to that? Are there questions? Are there processes? Because sometimes in a job interview, we're like, oh, do you have IB experience? Have you done accreditation? Have you done a strategic plan? But just doing it is not the same as how you did it that you were talking about.
Yeah. Well, a few years ago, we did a bit of research actually at LSE, and that was about how successful international school heads were in their roles. And what we discovered, it was looking at the application process, the whole interview process, and it was really quite astonishing because there was a direct correlation between the amount of time that people had spent connecting with and directly in contact with the board, the school, the community during the application process, and how successful they were in post. So that it was really astonishing that the shorter the amount of time they'd spent, like if they just had a Zoom conversation, the more likely it was they're going to be not very successful. Doesn't mean they were always not very successful, but the chances of them being successful were less. And then, but the more time that they'd spent doing that, the more successful they were, the more time and the connection they had. So there's something here about connection, about understanding, about not just asking a question, but getting people to demonstrate what it is that they can do, be around people. If you have people on site for 2 days, 3 days, with a series of meetings, of talking to people, getting feedback, getting that interaction, you see people. You see people. If you've just done a short interview on Zoom, you're not going to. And I know there are practicalities around that, but at least when it gets down to the last few, then absolutely that makes a difference.
The formal meetings and questions. I'm being a bit manipulative, but I'll intentionally have the driver pick them up 20 minutes late without any warning, just
Oh, really?
because you want to
Yeah.
see how are they going to handle it.
See how they react under
Yeah,
pressure.
and they're yelling at the driver, or they're messaging the secretary, or how are they handling it? Or you leave certain things unanswered, or not regimented on the schedule, to see how do they fill it. Do they ask the right questions? Do they find opportunities? Or how do they handle, being flexible? Because we know in international schools,
Yeah.
flexibility is essential. It's not going to run like a clockwork. So yeah, all of
True.
that's part of
True.
it.
Yeah. I might not be as mean as you in that respect, Howard, and that might not be as mean as you. But then remember that so much of the time that I spend now my life, my job really is about making sure that I'm delving deep into people's souls. So let's have a good conversation about that, I would say to the person.
Good.
It's fantastic. I wonder if we could just continue on this kind of a line around heads, and oftentimes, I mean, the key relationship, a key relationship rather that a school head has is with the board of managers or the owner, and can you talk about how that can go well and also how that can go wrong?
Well, I could actually genuinely speak for hours on this, so I'll try and summarize it, because one of my really key interests is in this complex relationship between governance and leadership. I'm really, really interested in that. I've seen so many different models. I understand as best it's possible to understand the difference between the two, and a lot of the time when I'm working with boards, I'm helping them understand that, while recognizing that as schools are moving from, say, a founder-led model to a board model, there are steps that need to go along the way. An owner-run organization, which looking maybe in a few years' time to transfer that to their children to own it. There are different steps that go along the way. So do recognize that every board is different, not for profit, for profit, different ways of looking at things. Absolutely. So there's a whole range there of different models. And what matters is that you have the clarity of how the model is going to evolve. Sometimes you don't always know completely, you don't know what that'll look like, but at least if there's an intention to discuss that, and there's an openness and honesty between the chair of the board or the owner or the founder and the head of school, to recognise that at a certain point in time, in due course, we might like to get to that other point in terms of what we are going to be as a school, and we're going to have to look at how we evolve this. And one approach to this is that we plan it out structurally. One approach is that we just experiment, etc. So I think there has been an acknowledgement of potential growth and change within that, but an understanding of where things are now. What is difficult is when chairs don't know that, or they're in denial, or they think they need to present the school in a different way from how it is, and so they're not honest about it because they think otherwise they won't attract the right person. But if they're thinking in their mind that they want a certain type of leader with a certain type of background, the person might be completely wrong for the school. But they might have an idea, well, there's prestige that comes with that. That person may just not be where the school is. And I think having that degree of appropriate humility around where the school is and looking for the person, that's actually wisdom. That's actually wisdom. So where things go wrong is where maybe there isn't that degree of wisdom, or there's a fear, a lack of understanding. And similarly on the head's part, it's like if the head comes in and says, oh, whatever you need, I can do this, I've got this. It's right, well, maybe they don't. And it shouldn't just be people looking to get a job for the sake of the job. And so a lot of this starts at the very beginning, before the appointment's even made, whether it's going to be a success or not. I think as you go further through the relationship, that honesty and transparency is important, given that there will always be a degree of privacy that's needed for each of those parties, because either the owner or the board chair will have to keep looking and seeing and asking the question, is the leader right? And they're not going to come to each meeting each week saying, I've been wondering if you're the right person, because that's not going to go down well, and it's going to create a lot of uncertainty. And similarly, the leader can't come to every meeting going, I did this really badly this week. Oh, this was terrible. This was terrible. And so they're going to have a degree, make sure they're giving a degree of confidence to the board chair. So there's kind of this relationship that you're sort of nudging forward towards greater and greater honesty and understanding, recognizing that each is a role and not just a person. The more you can keep reflecting on that, the better. Absolutely, the more reflection that can go into that. And also, I would say little red flags around it might be either if the board chair and the head of school are either very close, like they walk side by side, well, that means they've squashed that difference between governance and leadership. So that's not going to be very helpful. Or if they're too distant, because that way they're breaking the ties of governance and leadership. So all in all, I mean, if you thought about it, like kept thinking about it, all the different plates that are spinning, the cogs that are turning, think about it too much, you need to go and lie down in a darkened room to recover, it's just like so complicated. But I think if we can try, we should all try and do our best. And the more awareness we have, the more we can reflect, the more likely it is to be successful.
Yes, very valuable.
I've stunned you into silence there.
No, it's so true. We talk about this when we recruit teachers, about being the right fit for the school and for the teacher, the right country, the right city, the right context, teaching context. I like your points around evolution of the school and how the leader needs to be the right fit for where the school is at now, but also where it is going, and will they adapt to become what the school needs as the school adapts, because these organizations are dynamic and they do grow, and what worked in the past may not work in the future. So, yeah, and I appreciate your distinction. The difference in role between the head and the governors makes a big difference, and there does need to be a clear line. There needs to be a relationship, but there needs to be some separation.
Absolutely, because otherwise neither can function effectively.
Absolutely. I want to, you're also now a school founder, right? So you're part of the founding board for
part of
Dalton
the founding
School
board.
But yeah, well.
Yes.
And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that experience and what Dalton School is all about.
Oh, I love Dalton. I absolutely do. It's got such a big part of my heart. There's no question about that. So the Dalton plan actually dates back to Helen Parkhurst in the 1920s, and I'll be talking a little bit about this at the 21C conference, actually, because about where there's so much amazing work that was happening in the 1920s that really is absolutely true now in terms of when we're thinking about education, how do we ensure that we're doing the right thing for individuals and for society? And so this is what the Dalton School of Hong Kong is founded on. And it came about because there was a marvellous group of four women who came together to say that the education system in Hong Kong was not serving all of the students well. And it was creating exam pressure, anxiety, all of those different elements. And actually was, with the world changing in so many different ways, was it actually making them able to go off and do phenomenal things in the world? So these women got together and sat down, and two women in particular, who are the co-chairs of the board now, really pushed this forward. And they then looked for people to join their founding board. So I was approached because at the time I was the head of a Dalton school in Sydney, and there's no one way of doing Dalton. It's a philosophy, it's an approach, but it definitely has space within the structure for children to be able to grow and learn. And we have taken the school, and gosh, it's hard sometimes. It's been hard to get physical place. It's hard when you're building a school, when you're creating a school from the ground up. There are all absolute credit to the founders and to the teams of teachers and leaders who they brought in, and building the school up year on year. And so it's 10 years now that I've been on the board. And as I say, it's got such a big part of my heart because it's making a difference. It's like you see the difference in the children who are able to think more critically, who are able to have broader, wider ideas, who think in a much more interdisciplinary way. And we have a lot of focus on project-based learning, which grows the further up the school you go. And by project-based learning, I don't mean doing a project. I mean the process of design thinking that goes into developing. It could be a product, it might not be, it might be a service, it might be something. But the point is, it's the process that matters as much as the outcome. So there's such a lot of work on that, and currently we're just working towards finalizing the final years of the school, the high school, because that's the portfolio based approach. More and more universities in the world, in the top universities in the world, are interested not just in people's grades, but they're interested in far, far more than that. We know that, and so we're making sure that the children are able from an early stage to become real learners, real students of the world, and grow into that breadth so they'll thrive and succeed. I love it. I love it. And I'm so glad that you're going to people are going to have a chance to look at it as part of the school tour at the 21 liked it.
It's great. Thanks so much for that. I really enjoyed the visits that I've had to the school, and I always think you almost instantly get a sense of a school when you first walk in, and got really, really good vibes, I would say, from Dalton, and
good.
very happy to bring the tour to the school.
Excellent. I look forward to that enormously.
Fantastic. I want to circle back. We had a question earlier up that we kind of moved over, but one of the key themes for 21C in March is around kind of like, globalization, the big challenges that schools face these days, and there's a time of challenge and change. And one of the things that you've written a lot about, and I know you're very passionate about, is this concept of global competence. Could you define that and talk a little bit about what that means? I think it's something that in international schools, we're constantly going around on, right? Figuring out how do we do this and define it and grow it in students.
Well, you're right that I do feel strongly about it, so much that I wrote a book about it. And it's just that I wrote the book because I was noticing this and seeing this and a lot, and I just thought, just got to get these ideas down so that people can look at this. It's a globally competent school, a manual, and the idea is that people just look at it and go, right, okay, we can do that very simply, very straightforwardly, because global competence is essential. I absolutely believe it's essential. I think it is as essential as literacy and numeracy. I believe in it that strongly, and that's because if in a world that's globally connected, we need to be able to connect with others and understand them and appreciate that people come from different cultures, they have a different sense of identity, of place. And if we don't do that, that's when we alienate ourselves from other people. And the sources of conflict are around people not understanding where other people are coming from. Absolutely not. So that's really important for that. I mean, it's just fundamental for world peace, if you want to think about it as grandly as that. The other reason why global competence is so important is because if you're globally competent and you're able to integrate with others, communicate with others, you actually have more choices. And I came at this from a social mobility perspective, that in a world where we have people who struggle, who are in poverty, actually to be able to be more globally connected. And it's easier now than ever before to be globally connected, genuinely to understand how to work with other cultures. That makes people more socially mobile. And this is something that we're going to need as traditional industries dry up, indeed, as the environment changes and we have potential mass migration away from home. So there are all sorts of things in that we really need to make sure that we are countering by enabling our children to become globally competent. Now, often, again, part of what we say in schools, well, we're marvellous at this, we're good, we produce globally competent citizens. And then when you dig down into it, it's either because, well, we've got lots of people from different cultures in the school. Well, that's nice, but it doesn't mean that people are really understanding what's going on. So how are you going to create structures around that? Or it's because people will say, oh, yes, we do things. We have International Day, and we have the odd trip and so on. And I'm obviously being slightly flippant there, but when we dig down into it, the question is, what experience does the child have of developing along a globally competent route during their life? Now, that awareness, I would say, is simply tier 1. We need to go to a further tier, which is observing, seeing other people, recognizing that there are other cultures, and then moving beyond that to embracing and integrating. And I don't think we will have the answers to that. I think that challenge between your own identity, maintaining an identity, but also connecting, engaging, being influenced by others. I think that's something that we wrestle with as a world. And I think we need to continue to wrestle with it. But we have to wrestle with it openly and help expose children to as many ways of thinking and other identities as possible at the same time as exploring themselves. And that's what global competence is. And it's going to be slightly different for every child, but as a school, if we just assume that we produce global citizens, we can't back that up with the journey of the child all the way through the school, the opportunities they have, they're exposed to, how they're developed, what they're expected to move into. If we can't back that up, then I would question whether we can say that.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that closing the gap between what's on the website and what's actually happening is really important there. And again goes back to that intentionality piece, right? You can't just say it, or it can't just be a state of being because of the number of nationalities you have or the number of different days that you do or what have you. It has to actually be articulated in terms of the student experience. So I totally agree with that. Well, I'm also conscious of the fact that we're at over 40 minutes now, and so I want to be conscious of your time and Howard's time as well. So I want to thank you, Helen, for joining us today, and ask you just one sort of exit question. We always finish the podcast with an exit question, kind of circling back to early in the conversation around moving into leadership. And what is, the question is, what is your best advice to somebody who is wanting to move into leadership? What should they be thinking about or doing?
I'm really, really clear about this, and I say this to everybody. Invest in your own learning about yourself. That is the most important thing you can do, because the more you know about yourself, the more able you are going to be to adapt, to lead others, and make that difference in the world of that purpose that you seek. So that would be what I say. Invest in your learning about yourself.
Yeah, you can't go wrong there.
It's a wonderful way to wrap.
Very good. And thank you so much, Helen, for being on. I look forward to, hearing from you in March and just experiencing more of that passion that we've seen already in this short podcast.
Great pleasure.